So the devil you know is like what's familiar. You might not really love where you're at, but it's still familiar. I mean, the number of times I've heard, oh, you shouldn't lift weights, you're going to get hurt, or, XYZ, like that really gets into people's heads.
You should lift weights or you might get hurt.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We call it the toilet trust fall. It's like you can't, maybe you did like 100 and
I've never heard that.
150.
The toilet trust fall.
Toilet trust fall.
Steph, welcome to the Jedburgh Podcast.
Thank you for having me. This is super fun.
It's day 3 of Sandlot Jacks. We've been trying to do this since day 1 of Sandlot Jacks, but I told you we weren't doing anything until Jessie got here, and so we waited, and then we were supposed to do it yesterday, and the torrential rain that blew through here in the afternoon and decimated everything pushed us to today. So glad that you could make the time before you got ahead.
It was like an act of God, but I feel like it was meant to happen now for
Today
a reason.
is the perfect day.
Yeah, it is perfect.
Well, they've switched up everything behind us.
Yeah.
We've got people competing. They moved parts of the obstacle course. The GORUCK Games competition has been moved from the adjacent areas onto the, what are they calling this? The
Center field.
Center field, okay?
Ooh.
And they're going to be starting up here in a little bit on the obstacle course. They're finishing up their competition today. So many things going on, but we're going to have a conversation that is very important to both of because, well, I'm over 40. and
I'm almost 40, but a woman.
Yes. That's true. Because you have become very focused on what it takes to train and still maintain a high level of performance in the post-40 life.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you all about why you're focused on women, but I'm also going to ask you about what I can use because I need all the help I can get.
Yeah.
Jessie just put me through the obstacle course this morning.
Ooh.
And, we had fun.
Was there like a fire element or something added to it just for a little extra spice? Like
that would be fun.
Yeah.
They do that sometimes on Ninja. Like I wasn't aware that there was going to be like a fireball next to me when I cleared an obstacle and was like, that's there.
Pyrotechnics.
Yep.
The only fireball was the blooper reel that's going to be put together for my performance. So that's going to be it.
I'm curious about your do you find that women over 40 who are getting started have some trepidation about getting into it?
So, so many. And you have to kind of think about, too, like, I've been an athlete my whole life. I'm sure you've been athletic for a long time. Like, you went through PT and all sorts of stuff in the military. And I think when you are coming into something like strength training for the first time, I don't care how old you are. I think a lot of people are just intimidated.
Yeah.
And then you add to it the fact that like maybe your body isn't the same as it was when you were 20 and like things have changed, or you've been raising kids and not had a lot of time to take care of yourself. And so now you feel like, and there's a lot with mindset too, but you feel like you're on the back foot with everything. Mm-hmm. And I think that all of that stuff put together is enough of a barrier or enough friction for a lot of people to say, I'm okay. I think I'd rather just stay where I am. And I don't think a lot of people consciously say that, but sometimes that barrier to entry can feel so high. Recently I was listening to a masterclass online, and there was a quote that came up, and it was like, the devil you know. So the devil you know is like what's familiar. You might not really love where you're at, but it's still familiar. It's the unknown. It's the fear that our brains don't like. And so it keeps us from taking that next step, whatever it is. So I think when you're 40 or older, there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of fear tactics. I mean, I don't have to, obviously in a place like this, when you're with your people and you're in your bubble, everybody's like, yeah, getting strong, and like it's part of the culture. But when you go out of your bubble, I mean, the number of times I've heard, oh, you shouldn't lift weights, you're going to get hurt, or, XYZ, like that really gets into people's heads.
You should lift weights or you might get hurt.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I've felt the difference because I've had a lot of surgeries and had to rehab. And so I've felt what it feels like to not have muscles around a joint, and it hurts.
Yeah.
Like, your ligaments will hold your bones together, but like you need the muscle to support that and hold everything in alignment. And you feel so much better when you have that support. Like that's how a body is supposed to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it also hurts to start. And it's a different kind of pain. But like learning to recognize good pain of like, oh, I'm getting sore. Oh, that's a burn. Versus like, my shoulder pinches when I do this.
Yep.
And understanding that like that pinching might be because your bones are not being supported.
Yeah, I think there are, and there are no shortage of fitness programs and apps, and the access we have now is just amazing, right? There was no internet in, I think about like when I was a kid, in the 80s, like really nobody was on the internet. That wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
And so you would have to hire a trainer, or, maybe you went through school and you were an exercise physiologist, or you knew how to work out, or maybe you were a boy on a football team. Or you had a dad or an uncle who knows how to bench press and you're working out in the garage with him. So you might have had some early exposure. But I feel like now we have the opposite, which is so much information. And so very often I'll hear stories from people and they're like, oh, I started this program or I made it up. And, people just want to start. So they feel like a lower barrier to entry with cost or hiring someone. I'll just do it on my own. And I think I love that spirit. But also that can really get you into some, not trouble, but it can really make you feel like I am so deathly sore. Like we call it the toilet trust fall. It's like you can't, maybe you did like 100 and
I've never heard that.
The
150.
toilet trust fall?
Toilet trust fall. It's when you've blown out your quads.
Oh.
And you go to sit down and you get to that point in the lowering and the eccentric and you're like, you've got nothing left and like, I just have to fall, right?
Yes. I did that like when we were at Wadapalooza and we did so much quad stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
That I actually, in the hotel bathroom in the dark, I like leaned forward.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh, I'll lean forward and then fall backwards, not realizing that the sink was in front of me. So I bumped my nose on the sink. It was amazing.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that's very common, I'm
Right.
sure.
Yeah, so people start out and they're like, well, I'll do body weight. It seems less intimidating. I don't have to lift anything. So they're like 3 sets of 50 of everything. And I'm not even joking. I heard recently a story from a friend of a friend who she wanted to start strength training and was doing 3 sets of 50 of like 5 different exercises. Not only was that workout taking 2 hours, but of course you have the volume and the novelty, which both on their own are going to contribute to that muscle soreness. So she was just, if you do you're all excited, you're going to get started, you're kind of just going along with it. You don't really have a clear plan. You're not familiar with stuff. And then you're like going to do high volume, high repetition kind of stuff that you've never done before. You're going to be sore for so long. And so I think that even on its own is enough to turn people off because they think, is every day going to be like this?
Right.
So I think that's really where getting some good guidance, like a good properly progressed program, if you can work with someone in person, I say even 3 sessions, hire a trainer to teach you through, walk through the motions. If you're going to be going into a gym, they can show you around how to use the machines, so you don't feel as intimidated and you're not you're not making yourself so sore with DOMs that you give up.
Yeah.
You quit, right? It's all about the long game.
Science is really important to the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
Everything's about being science-backed. What happens to your body? I mean, back it up for a minute and talk about what happens to your body, man or woman, as you progress, and why is 40 this pivotal point?
I think culturally the age 40 really sticks in our minds. I mean, when I was growing up, we were having over-the-hill parties for, our relatives.
I remember those.
Right?
Do they do those? I do not have
I
one
don't
of
think
those.
they do those anymore, but,
Good.
you're turning 40 and it's like everything's falling apart. And so I think there's this cultural narrative.
That happens, though.
Well,
I turned 40 and COVID happened.
Yeah.
We had a kid. I lost my job and I bought a boat and a truck.
yeah, really, really stressful, really stressful. But, I think when we look at like why is 40 a real key age, especially for women, we're could be already in perimenopause or having some perimenopause symptoms. Like, so that transition's coming up. Like, look, we just don't recover as quickly as we used to. We need to give our our soft tissue, a little bit more TLC. Like we maybe need a little bit more, we need to be a little bit smarter with like active recovery versus just going out and doing a 10 out of 10 workout every day. So sometimes people are like, oh, but I don't want to rest today. And I'm like, that's fine. But do you know how to like moderate your intensity? So we're experiencing, no matter, man, woman, we're starting to experience muscle loss starting at age 30.
Really?
Yes. So we have a slow decline starting at 30, decade upon decade of muscle loss. And then once we get to like our mid 60s or we're sort of going through the menopause transition. So a lot of stuff happens in your mid 60s, but also for most women, I think the average onset of menopause is like 52. There is a precipitous drop off in things like muscle mass and bone density because of the loss of estrogen. Right. So
is that assuming that you're not in a program to counteract that? Okay.
Yeah. So the good news is that there is a lot that we can influence, and I feel like midlife is this time where there's a lot of stuff going on around us. You mentioned, a pandemic and losing your job, and like sometimes there's this stuff that we can't control, right? Life stress and things like that. But it is really about focusing on what we can influence. And so, yes, we can offset that natural loss of muscle mass. And obviously testosterone on the male side too, right, is declining. So we can start to offset that by strength training. We can improve our bone density by strength training. So it's not a foregone conclusion that we're going to end up with sarcopenia, which is that sort of clinical loss of muscle mass, or osteoporosis, right, which is extremely low bone density. And the prevalence of that, even in the male population, does increase, but in the female population is really high. So, there are things that we can do, and I think that's the good news. I think that's the positive part of it all.
Yeah, my mom, I think she was 61 when she got diagnosed with osteopenia, the precursor to osteoporosis. And that's when she started strength training. And she did exactly what you said. She got a strength training coach who's also a chiropractor and worked with him at first 2 days a week. I think she's on 3 days a week now. But she fully reversed her osteopenia.
That's awesome.
And is like a diehard athlete now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I really liked how you called your mom an athlete.
Oh,
right there.
badass.
And it's really important because you and I, Steph, were talking about this the other day, and you brought up this concept of the athletic identity.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter who you are. So can you talk more about the athletic identity and how it doesn't just have to be a professional athlete?
Yeah, and I'll preface this by saying I'm not a sports psychologist or anything like that, but I am an athlete, and I've been working with women in particular who are very athletically active but feel like they bristle. They're like, but I'm not an athlete. Maybe they had a bad experience in high school with a coach who talked down to them and they felt like they weren't good enough. Or, in gym class, they had to do that like mile run and they're like, oh, I'm last, I'm not good enough. Or, just feeling like they are not professionals. They don't get paid to train. Or they think that an athlete is somebody like you or like Michael Phelps. You're on TV, right? So like you're at a very high level. You're amazingly talented at what you do. And it's almost like superhuman, right? We see people that are talented like you or, Serena Williams or all these people that we think they're athletes, like they're in the Olympics, they are elite, they are professional.
Yeah, pro athletes.
Yeah, and so we feel like we're not that. And so it puts it's like existing in this binary. And I would suspect that a lot of people believe that they're not an athlete because they have this concept of who an athlete is. Either they look up to athletes, they find them very inspirational, and they're like, but I'm not that. So therefore, if I'm not that, then I'm not an athlete. And so I think it really does affect how people conceptualize a lot of important things in their lives. In other words, and I think James Clear's work in Atomic Habits, for me, this part was like really key because he has this model of, most people start with the goals, the outcomes, and then they work back to what are the habits that they need to have. What are the systems that they need to put into place? But at the core of that in his model is that identity. So if we can figure out who is the kind of person we are trying to become, then that helps to shape the habits that we put into place in our lives and what we prioritize. And so I feel like, and that's obviously going to get us to the goal, the outcome. But if we can help people who are training hard with a purpose, with intensity, with goal in mind, trying to be stronger, add some muscle mass, improve their bone density. Like they want to compete in something like this or come to the event. I've ran into somebody who was like, I knew I was going to be coming to this, and she had never strength trained before. And she was like, I decided I wanted to get strong so I could like come here and do stuff. Like that's a goal. So you are an athlete, and you think about what else falls into place. Maybe you figure out, I got to get a little bit more sleep, or I'm gonna like try to eat in a way that supports my training. Like I know I need to maybe increase my protein intake, or you're gonna set that time aside and figure out, what does my day need to look like? Maybe I need to get my training done in the morning, so I know I'm gonna get it done, because the rest of the day gets away from me. So I think that piece, and leaning in when women are like, oh, but I'm just not good enough to be an athlete. I'm not strong enough. I'm not fit enough. I'm not muscular enough. Whatever it is to help them actually lean into that as a sort of a catalyst to say, well, how can we use that to help inform the type of things you're going to do, what you're going to prioritize, and that's going to move you toward your goals. So I think it's a really powerful thing. That comes up with a lot of my clients and a lot of the people that I talk to, that they can maybe work on a little bit and just see, like, why am I so resistant? Like, ask questions. Why am I really resisting this idea? And, what's on the other side of it for me if I lean in a little bit more?
Yeah, that definition of self is so huge. I feel like, the reason there's a word for a pro athlete is because there are also athletes who are not pro.
Yeah.
And it sounds like
yeah, we forget about that. Though.
Yeah,
we
it's so true.
That.
It's a good point. I'm gonna bring that up because I like that.
Yeah. And then also, like, how do you define an athlete?
Yeah.
Maybe as like a person who makes time in their day to do things that an athlete does. Yeah. Like if you are, like you said, changing your sleep patterns, eating healthier, and exercising, training in athletic things. Those are the actions of an athlete.
Yeah.
And you got to remember too, I think it's important, it comes back to the perspective. It comes back to, what are you trying to do? And you talked about quantifying your goals and putting okay, I can be an athlete, but as Jessie said, there's a difference between what athletics is going to be to me versus what it's going to be to her. And even though, I'll beat myself up some days because I'll text Jessie or we'll talk and she'll be like, oh, I'm working out, and I'm like, damn it, I'm not working out. And that's what I mean. Okay, we talked like 4 hours ago, you're still working out, right? And I'm like, man, I haven't worked out today. And then I got to remember, like, well, that's her job. Mm-hmm. My job is not to work out. I can still be athletic. I can still train for my own personal health and to feel good and longevity so I can play with my kids as I get older. But we have different definitions of what it means to be an athlete.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, is everybody being able to define that for themselves, and allowing it to evolve as we are aging, as we are going through different seasons of life. What is a priority now? What are our most important values now? And how can athleticism and strength be a catalyst to move toward that thing, or include that in your life for that purpose? And I think that's really important. Sometimes those of us who have been athletic for our whole lives have that. We think about like winning the high school state championships, and that's like the glory days, or
those are the best days.
Yeah, the best days. And we think that those days are behind us, or because life has changed and we're not like that anymore. We were talking about can you run the 8-minute mile? Can you run the 6-minute mile? I don't know. And so we compare, and I feel like there's a lot of talk about comparison is the thief of joy, and like comparing to other people is a very natural thing that humans do, but also can really keep us kind of stuck. Mm-hmm. But there's also a lot of comparison to self that I feel like comes up with a lot of the people I work with, is like, I used to be able to do this. I used to be able to do that. And it's okay to be honest and say, this is what I used to be able to back squat almost 300 pounds. I don't do that anymore, and that's totally fine. But to not use that as a constant kind of like, you're like self-flagellating with like, I used to be able to do this, I used to be able to do that, because you're not looking ahead at all of the other possibility of maybe even new things. We were talking about rucking, you know, maybe you're like, this like cool stuff out here that I could try. So I feel like being able to allow that identity, those goals to evolve and shift and change is hard, because again, our brains don't like change. But that, I feel like, is the secret to like athletic longevity.
For sure.
Is that evolution, that flexibility.
Yeah, I sometimes have to play games with myself because, like I said, I've come back from so many injuries, and if I'm looking at, well, last year my record was 43 pull-ups in one set. Like, it's going to be really depressing to get on the bar and only be able to do 8 right now. That gives me a big barrier of like, I don't want to do this set because I'm going to be disappointed. And so I just have to shift. I'll just make up a new game and be like, okay, we're not trying to see how many I can do in one set. We're going to see how many minutes it takes me to get to 100. Or, you know, scale for yourself. Give yourself a different bar so that you can't compare to before. Give yourself a whole new bar, and you get to try to beat this new game.
That's so smart. I love that.
I have to manipulate my own psychology to make everything a game. Make it fun.
Can I ask you about dumbbells?
Sure.
You're a big fan of dumbbells.
Yeah.
Why?
I think they're a little bit underappreciated.
I agree with you.
I mean, we've got street parking. Where they're doing a workout at some point. They had like, how many people were on that?
Miranda's coming in here next.
How many? You can ask her then. How many people were on the field with them yesterday? Because I heard they did not even have enough dumbbells for all of the people.
You could not see the grass over there where those people
It was like
are.
150 people or something. It was a huge number. So I think the reason, and I train with all sorts of equipment, but I think dumbbells are really accessible for people, and are very versatile and are underappreciated in a lot of ways. Sometimes people say, "Oh, but they're not hard enough. They're not heavy enough." And I think, there's going to be kind of an upper limit for some things. Like if I wanted to back squat, I don't know, 225, like I'd have to have like two 120 or 1 to 200 pound dumbbells, and I'm gonna have to get them both up to the shoulders, and that's gonna be really hard, right? But I think there are ways to train with them and make it clever. And for a lot of people still, like after the pandemic, they just didn't go back to the gym. And maybe they don't have enough money right now. It's not in the resources to like build out a full garage gym, or they don't have the space. We don't have an outdoor or an indoor space. We don't have a garage, so we work out outside. We live in San Diego. That's kind of a nice thing too. But I think you can get a lot of work done with a very simple piece of equipment, and you don't sandbags are great, barbells are great, cable machines are great, like they all have a place, but if it just is like such a simple way to begin, that I feel like if you're getting started, it's one of the easiest points of entry, especially for some of the body weight stuff that can the upper body weight stuff for women that can feel really hard. If we're talking push-ups, a push-up is going to be easy for people like us, but if you're just starting and you're like, I remember when I couldn't do a push-up, so how are we going to work upper body pressing, horizontal pressing, vertical pressing, pulling, dumbbells, right? and build that upper body strength. Like dumbbells are a really nice way to add some load without having to go, into that full plank position and do a push-up. So I feel like if you're starting out, it's a really nice way to get acclimated. They're also great for people who are a little bit older and maybe struggle or have had past injuries, struggling to get into like a back squat position, to have that thoracic mobility. For a lot of people is really difficult. Or maybe getting here into the front rack with a barbell is just really challenging on your shoulder. So being able to have the independent movement of those dumbbells to bring it into maybe more of a neutral grip is really opens things up for a lot of people. Being able to work that unilateral stuff, especially. A lot of people realize they have discrepancies between the right and the left. So working unilateral upper body, again, as we age, we get older, so important to like notice where we have those discrepancies. Even lower body stuff as well, working balance and stability, another key thing as we're getting older. So yeah, I think they're great. They're a great training tool. That's
one of the things I like about dumbbells is that you do need more stability if you're doing a bench press than you would if it were a bar.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've gone through that progression a lot of times. When I come back from 2 shoulder surgeries, I can't do a push-up. So I was starting with just moving my arms through that range of motion, and then, my little 2-pound dumbbells were my best friends for a long time.
Yeah.
But you can progress that way until you can bear your own body weight.
Totally, yeah.
We just worked out with CrossFit CEO Don Fall this morning, and I could not do a push-up when we were done. Let me say, I could not do a push-up before we were done.
Like part of the way through.
Yeah, part of the way
We did a
through.
bunch, though.
Yep, that's that volume is going to get you.
Yeah, that's great.
What's next for you? What's the focus going
What's
into the
next
rest
for
of this
me?
year?
I am right now beta testing a new strength program. So that's fun to
Is
just
it a
get
program
feedback.
you do on, like, with one-on-one with individuals or a group or an online?
No, so it'll be an app-based online templated program, mixing all sorts of stuff. So mixing some barbell work, some accessory work, dumbbells, getting people to even do a little bit of isolation exercise, just to help build up the shoulders, particularly like that sort of stuff, including plyometrics as well. So, again, thinking about 40 plus, that's always in the back of my mind. A couple of things in the program to really make it a little bit more tailored would be including that plyometric work a few times a week. So plyometrics are like the chef's kiss for building bone. We think it's always impact, and there's some really interesting research that came out recently about things like running. So running being a weight-bearing exercise, or rucking, right? Weight-bearing exercise, we're getting that impact. And after a certain number of cycles of that, the bone cells kind of turn off for a little while. So we're actually not getting a continuous bone building response. So things like plyometrics include hopping and jumping and things of that nature are really great for that, because they're short, punctuated, they work power, they help us keep our type 2 fibers, our explosive fibers, which we also tend to lose as we age. So this is one of the reasons why we tend to have slower reaction time. We're not able to jump as high or move as quickly, which again, for those of us that are fitness people, we're that's such a bummer. But then we see people, we live in a place that has elderly housing down the street. So we see everybody walking to the grocery store to and from. And one day there was a lady crossing the street, and the light started to change. She's an older lady. She started to do that shuffle, and I could see her body, her upper body start to go, and I was like, no. And she caught her foot, and she started to fall, and she did the world's longest stumble, trying to catch herself, and ultimately she fell, and we went to help her. She was fine. But even stuff like that, can you recover if you stumble? You stub your toe, that quickness of response is why that type 2 fiber is so important. So plyometrics are fantastic. And the other thing I'm including is a little bit more frequent deload for the main heavy lifting, to give people a little bit more of that undulating, hey, we're gonna lift heavy, then we're gonna just back off a little bit. We take the percentages or the intensity down. You're still moving, but to really allow that recovery time, and then we go again. So
yeah,
that's
that's always
coming.
a tricky part for me, is knowing when to deload.
Yeah, I'd say, in general, at least once every 3 months.
Okay.
Maybe sooner.
That's reasonable.
Maybe sooner. Just
Probably
depends.
sooner.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. Cool.
And yeah, you're right. A lot of that stuff is kind of play by ear. Get to know yourself. Get to know your body and your training. Especially as somebody who competes, working with a competition athlete is very different, because even when I was working with my Olympic weightlifters, right, we're peaking for a meet, and so we have to plan out what does the year look like, and when are we going to be in more of a really low rep, really high weight block? When are we going to be more, back off and do some more hypertrophy and restart the season and do some GPP, that kind of thing. So it really depends a lot on the individual, but I think for people who are training continuously, is just having that mind for, when am I going to back off? When am I going to do a little bit of a deload, and then come back stronger? And people are always shocked. They're like, I thought something really bad was going to happen because I did a deload and I didn't train, to that intensity level.
Yeah.
But when we understand how we actually go through that, how do we get super compensation and allowing for that recovery, especially now that we're we're in this stage of life where it's just like there's a lot of responsibility, there's a lot of stress. I feel like for a lot of people having that just like that little program downtime is really clutch.
How so with plyometrics for someone who's older, if they haven't been jumping lately, how do you make it safe? Because I imagine like as you age and you're losing that plyometric explosive response, can you rebuild it? And how do you protect?
Yeah. I think a couple things. If somebody has something like bone loss, is really important to work with somebody who knows their individual situation, and it's probably going to be a collaboration between like medical team, physical, like PT, trainer, and just sort of seeing like what's appropriate for that person. I think, if you're not used to jumping, like we obviously have to think about past injury, things like that, but it can literally be something as simple as the motion of jumping rope and starting off with like very small increments of time, or even supported, right? So we don't need to even turn a rope because that could be a tripping hazard for some people. So can we just actually mimic that slight jump off the floor? We don't maybe need to be doing like max height box jumps, and certainly that won't be appropriate for everyone. Also thinking about learning to land is really key. So actually with a lot of athletes is teaching them how to land softly before they ever start to like do any kind of rebounding or anything like that. Is like, I'm just coming down off a step and I'm learning how to absorb that force. So taking it slow, progressing as always, starting with small hops and small jumps. Also, I would say if a person's not used to like a weight transfer, like hopping back and forth, like say laterally side to side, is just like being able to do that and stop and then like reset rather than having to go back and forth the whole time. So there's tons of ways to keep it lower to the ground, to slow it down, to use something for balance or support, probably bilateral, so working two legs first, right? It's going to be easier for a lot of people. Something exciting just happened over there.
The wind's picking up, so things are going flying.
And then also remembering that there's upper body plyometrics. So it doesn't even have to be something like people automatically think of plyo push-ups. But again, does someone have that strength at the moment to add in the explosiveness? If not, okay, cool. Can we take a med ball, find a brick wall, and have them throw this med ball at the brick wall? Ball slams, supine, ball toss. There's tons of ways to work that upper body too. So let's not forget that. That's important. But really, just finding what's accessible and what makes sense is like the next small step for that person. But certainly, like getting all that medical clearance and stuff ahead of time. I'm always forever telling people, like, I'm not a corrective exercise person, so you might need to work with that team and say, like, what's the next best step for me, especially if somebody is in treatment for osteoporosis or something. They have to be a little bit more mindful of things like balance and having support so that they don't fall, which is really important.
Definitely.
Steph, as we close out, the Jedburghs in World War II had to do three things every day to be successful. I call them habits, foundations. They had to be able to shoot, they had to be able to move, and they had to be able to communicate. If they did these three things with the utmost precision, because they focused on it in their preparation, they could actually apply their attention to more complex challenges that came their way. What are the three things that you do every day in your life to be successful?
Oh, this is such a great question. I would definitely say move. So getting some movement, super, super important. Connection, just connecting with other people. I was going to say drink coffee, but that's
a good one. That's an important one.
But having some kind of a morning ritual, I feel like for me, I don't have that big long list of like the morning must include all these things, but having that grounding element I think is so important. And also coffee is delicious. So but it's a great thing to be able to share with people. You think, what do we do? Hey, let's go get a coffee and just sit down and chat. So
it is.
Yeah.
Move, connection, have a morning routine, but drink coffee.
Also make it.
That's one that like I would hesitate the same way as you. Like I don't want that to be one of my core things, but it 100% is. Like I have to have my morning coffee.
I love it.
Well, thanks for spending some time with us. It was a few days in the making.
Yeah,
but
it was great.
I'm glad we were able to spend time, learn from you. So it's super informative. Love what you're doing.
Thank you.
We're big fans, and we wish you the best, and we hope to see you here next year.
I appreciate it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks. Woo!